So other than ships, we did get some rather big changes and additions to the gunnery system for naval forces. I'll go over this in some order, so be sure to stay tuned. Firstly, the noticeable HUD changes, starting with the green circles. These represent your turrets and can change depending on the status of your turret. If it is bright green, it means the corresponding turret can fire. If it's a dimmer green, it means that it's getting on target. If the circle is grey, it means that the turret cannot get on target. If the circle is turning red, it shows that the gun is overheating. If the circle is completely red, it means that the turret is out of action, either because the guns are jammed or because it's destroyed. And a very nice feature of these circles is the reload counter. So now you actually have a time associated with your reload instead of just a circular progression. I must note that most of these functions already exist on the Crosshair and the live server, but it's quite nice and organized now. In general, I quite like this addition, but at the same time no longer seeing the relative location of your guns to your aim point, like this, is certainly something to get used to. Another minor pet peeve of mine is the fact that because of the overheating circle now being part of these green circles at the bottom of your screen, it can often be somewhat tricky to actually keep an eye on it, so be sure to keep an eye on that green circle at the bottom of your screen if you have guns that tend to overheat quickly. Now another HUD change, of course, is the gun sight itself, and I'm quite a fan of it, as it is a less heavy screen presence compared to the current one. But it's the other elements that I'm a bit on the fence about, versus the impact point indicator. A nice addition and certainly helps everyone get a visual indication roughly where your shells will hit, but it's a bit too gamey in my opinion, but that's just me. The one change I'm less of a fan of is the fact that the range to target, and your correction to it in the realistic gaming system, are now bright red text on your target instead of being in the center of your sight like on the current live server. The reason I like playing realistic is the lack of markers. These aren't exactly markers as they show no info on who the target is or what they're in, but still. Talking about aiming systems, I'll just say this now, but the addition of fire control systems didn't change anything of how the aiming system itself works, just added something to it, which I'll talk about later. But I did notice that I cannot enable the realistic aiming system in arcade on this dev server. I hope that this is just a minor oversight or a bug on the dev server, but it might be quite annoying if it's an intended feature. Another minor change to the realistic aiming system is the correction, but only visually. Instead of the correction being the range to target like it is on the current live server, it is now relative to the range at which you locked onto the target originally. It's a minor visual change, but it is kind of off-putting and again something to get used to, but functionally still the exact same. But now the big addition, fire control systems. I again want to specify that this does not replace anything of the current aiming systems, it's just a completely independent addition to naval gunnery. So first off, what does this fire control mechanic do? Well, it calculates a lead to the target. And this is the correct lead which also takes into account the motion of your vessel. This is a big change, very big, especially since it's an addition to the entire Blue Water fleet and some of the bigger coastal vessels. But I really want to hammer in that this is the only thing it does. So what affects this new lead indicator? Well, here's where the new modules come in. Fire control directors, rangefinders and fire control rooms. These can be found on most of the ships with this new mechanic and have three characteristics: measure accuracy, fire solution calculation time, and fire solution updating time. The measure accuracy affects the accuracy of the lead indicator. The calculation time is the time it takes between first locking onto a target and calculating the lead. And the updating time is the time it takes after this first calculation to update the lead. I find the naming to be very confusing and it really should be changed so that it's more obvious that it only calculates a lead for the target. But that's a personal nitpick. So what happens when you destroy these modules? Well, that's the interesting part. If the fire control room gets taken out, it resets the lead calculation. If a rangefinder or fire control director is taken out, then if there are any backups, it'll use those. This is also where the different stats come into play. The fire control room will always use the best rangefinder or director it can find. If all the rangefinders and directors were to be taken out, then the lead calculation gets reset. So what will this addition change? Well, a lot obviously. It'll mean that combat maneuvering and fine control of speed will be necessary to throw off the lead indicator. But at the same time, this lead indicator isn't a restriction, it's a suggestion. I am certain that many of the best players will still land their shots on target like they have before, but now everyone, even the less skilled players, have become more dangerous. I hope that this video made it somewhat clear what changed on the dev server. I'll leave you with this though, in a datamine from a credible source, which is linked below. There was a line about naval planes becoming a modification on ships. This isn't present on the current dev server, but I'm quite curious and somewhat afraid. If anything is still unclear, be sure to ask in the comments. I do read them and I'll do my best to answer them as soon as possible. Goodbye, and may the seas be calm.